there might be 8 different groups of, just to use the example, wallet buyers. They might end up buying the same wallet, but for different reasons, right? One might buy it because it's like, I just want it to be really like small or whatever. And one, I want it to be it because it's like this made of this material. And the other, it's like, I just wanted one that was like cost effective, right? It might actually be the same wallet, but if you can figure out who was interested in what features and highlight those, obviously like you're going to win versus me guessing or throwing out all 8 things and only one is really the one that's driving your purchase decision.
I'm thrilled today to have our guest, Mike Mothner, on the show. Mike joins us as founder and CEO at Wpromote. Mike, do you want to say hi and tell our listeners a little bit about Wpromote?
Yeah, Jason, great. Thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation. It's something we talk about a lot, in the course of our day-to-day over here at Wpromote. So excited to share some of these stories. Yeah, so Wpromote is a performance marketing agency, but really I think the area that what differentiates us and what will give hopefully some good color in this conversation is this idea that we're not just driving an ROI, we're driving business outcomes. That's going to relate a lot to what we talk about. And then our belief that the digital marketing that wins needs to have the very tight flywheel of strategy, media, creative, and data, and that those drive each other. Those cannot be sort of, live in separate worlds or separate vendors or separate teams internally. And when those all work together, you end up with a really powerful growth engine, and that'll, I think, tie in really nicely today. But thanks for having me. Excited to have this conversation.
Likewise. Mike, you and I were catching up the other day, and your experience is just incredibly wide and incredibly deep, which is pretty unusual. And as we talked more, we're like, hey, like maybe we can just have a podcast episode about digital marketing. We're like, no, it's a little bit too wide. I think one thing that I thought was just incredibly timely and super interesting was just the deep experience you have with brands, that have been, brick and mortar, selling out of their storefront for decades or more, and are making the leap today to going direct to consumer. And obviously, it's been super interesting because there are some who aggressively made this pivot when COVID happened. There are others that tried to couple together some infrastructure when COVID happened and are now trying to do it right. There are others who just suffered tremendously during COVID and are now finally getting to it. And there's really just a massive continuum in between. But I think today, I think there are very, very few brands that are saying, hey, we're going to go brick and mortar only and not have any direct to consumer presence at all. And I think the pandemic was an amazing experience that forced that, and also forced that very quickly. And I think a few other world events could have come online that could have taught us as much, because when you're forced to do something in 3 months, like you're definitely going to be making lots and lots of mistakes. So with this, maybe just talk a bit about, let's kick off, maybe just talk a bit about the problem, your experience, and anything to add before we get into brass tacks here.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting one. And COVID was a fascinating forcing function, right? Because, and by the way, in lots of ways, I never thought we'd work remote. And then suddenly we had to, and we realized, oh, it works. Like there's so many ways that it had this, I think almost a generational impact in the way we work, but certainly in the way we consume, shop, make decisions, and then actually transact. So, if you kind of go a little bit back in time, there's several different sort of roads that businesses or organizations have taken, and they're trying to ultimately achieve a common goal, which basically is, if I have a brand that makes something, whatever, clothes, electronics, beauty, whatever, I want to be where the customers want to buy, right? Whether that's online, whether that's on their phone, whether they're in a mall, like ideally, I want to be everywhere they want to be and nowhere that they don't want to be, right? That's kind of the goal. And so, that may be the future state goal of all brands. They got there in different ways, right? So there's sort of like, you have several very different flavors. You have, and I'll use some real client examples. So you have, for example, one of our clients, Whirlpool. Whirlpool, they make appliances, and they're a 90-year-old company. For 85 years of their 90 years, they sold through retailers, right? You didn't buy from Whirlpool. They make stuff. They do some advertising to raise awareness, but then you walk into a Best Buy or a, formerly Circuit City or a Home Depot or maybe an Amazon, and you buy a, Whirlpool. And they realized a couple of years ago, okay, well, first of all, Circuit City doesn't exist. So we just, if you're a toy manufacturer and 80% of your business is Toys R Us and it goes chapter 11, like you got a major problem, right? And so seeing that this was, there's retail apocalypse, however you want to describe it, there's some resurgence. It's not all that, but certainly there's an existential challenge here, right? Which is if all I do is make something and I don't actually sell it, I'm beholden. My livelihood as a company, the ability for me to survive and thrive is dependent on these other organizations that actually do the selling, that have foot traffic or people that go to their websites, et cetera. So you have Whirlpool as one example, and we'll probably, maybe later in the conversation step in. That's like, okay, I need to evolve into, the future state as a world that not 0% of our, let's go from 0% of sales are sold direct to consumer to some number above zero. Maybe the right number is 5, 10, 20. Maybe in 20 years, it's 100%, right? Maybe that's our entire world is selling direct to consumer. I don't think they think that, but it's some number significantly greater than zero, right? Which means they got a lot of work to do. You have a second example that might be a retailer that has their own stores, right? So different flavors. So another client of ours, Hibbett Sports. So they're sort of like a Foot Locker in the mostly in the Southeast. And so they're not a manufacturer of shoes, but they're a retailer. And up until I think 2017, they'd never sold online, right? They were late. They'll admit this, very late to the game. But they sat and waited and realized, okay, now it's mature. People are clearly buying shoes online. Zappos broke that mold many years ago, right? People can do it as long as you have good return policies and support and stuff, and a good website. And for them, it was, okay, our future is an omni. We don't plan on not having 900 stores, but clearly the future state is one where some people want to go into a store and some people really don't want to go to a store. I hate shopping, right? So like if I can avoid a store, I'm going to do it. And so their future state is definitely this omni state. And I'll say the third version, which we're not really talking about today, but it's worth noting, or you actually have, because it is part of what this world, kind of this third cohort that we talk about, are actually more modern, sort of the newer brands in different areas in lots of different sectors that actually started just selling direct to consumer, set up a website and I ship direct to consumer. And at a certain point, you kind of run out of low-hanging fruit. And there's hey, maybe I need some retail presence. Maybe that's I sell through retailers that are there, or maybe I open my own stores. You have Warby Parker that got big to a certain point, or Tom's Shoes or Bonobos, and then said, we're going to open our stores. Or you have others that said, we're selling more of a CPG product or selling direct. At the end of the day, I need the distribution. Interestingly, I guess my point going kind of down this rabbit hole here is you have these three different starting points of how they got there. One new company, one very old, one retail, one not retail. The end state is a very shared common goal, which is I just want to be in the right place at the right time for people that are probably likely to or potentially likely to buy my product. Now, getting from A to B is what we're going to spend time on, and we could spend probably 10 hours on this, but we won't. But that is a starting point. Like that's the mission, right? And we spend a significant portion of our business kind of like figuring out that mission.
Yeah, I mean, look, ultimately, it's about from a marketing perspective, it's brand distribution.
Yeah.
I think one thing we probably learned over the last 10 years, is building a household brand that really scales is tremendously difficult.
Yeah.
I think what we've seen with a lot of a lot of these newer vertically integrated direct to consumer or digitally native direct to consumer businesses, they start going and building pop-up shops, they start building retail stores, and and it's not just about distribution, it's about awareness. As we walk by a mattress store, if you walk by an eyeglasses store, you notice that and if you walk by it every single day, you drive by it, it really has high recall. A good friend of mine, was on the founding team in Maple, which, maybe for any of our listeners, based in New York City might remember these guys. They were, really a vertically integrated direct to consumer, lunch and dinner service. They're very high end food, affordable. It was like $12 for a meal, but they realized that just the brand, the brand recall was just not high enough, to scalably acquire customers. And ultimately, the business didn't make it. In the last legs of the business, they're asking, "Hey, can we actually, start some retail storefronts like a Chipotle, would to get that kind of brand understanding?" But they, it was just too late and too expensive. So I think what's super interesting about this conversation is for listeners who have that solid retail presence, and are in the infancy or not doing direct to consumer well today. The brand is really sort of the hardest part to get right from a distribution perspective in terms of years of investment and putting the foundations in place.
Yeah, it is interesting too. I mean, this is almost a separate conversation, but it does relate to this, which is there's this when you cross the chasm from hey, we were just physical retail stores, we're now selling direct to consumer, or we're just selling through our partners in retail and direct to consumer, or whether you're the other direction, right? You're the, you know, sort of we were direct to consumer. We got to reach people that don't want to buy online, right? And go the other direction. In both of those, there is a brand and performance challenge, right? There's hey, I want to, you know, and this is why, by the way, one of the larger convergences that we probably were preaching it before it was, you know, we were probably early to the game on this, but I think we put out a white paper way before people said this, not taking the credit. It was literally too early. No one understood it, but it was this idea of all brand is performance and all performance is brand, right? If you have great performance marketing that's driving people to buy, that is branding, right? That is getting it, whether they buy or not. There's a branding component to that. And obviously, if you do, you know, sort of branding type of marketing, you know, I don't know, a TV spot is going to be, that's totally driving performance. Now, measuring it might be hard, right? But if it's not driving performance, don't do it. I mean, we have kind of like one of our little isms internally, which is like, I mean, we always laugh like we're a performance marketing, you know, company, and it's like, well, you shouldn't do marketing that doesn't perform. Why do we have to say performance? Like if you're doing it and it doesn't perform, like you should probably stop doing that right away. What they really mean is like measurable, right? Or attributable. And so, which is a challenge. But interestingly, I think when you talk about brand, I think it's just worth making the point that it's when we say brand, it doesn't mean like, oh, you have this is my brand budget, and I'm just going to do this in a vacuum over here to like raise the brand. Everything we're doing should drive performance, whether it's a sale today or a sale, you know, a long time from now. And so your branding work should drive performance. And if you're driving performance, like clearly that's raising your brand. If I am served the right ad at the right time and I buy today and I get the pair of shoes and I wear it and love them, that's branding, right? That is totally growing your brand. And so just as a paradigm, we think about this all together. But I agree that the brand piece is big. And, you know, interestingly, just to kind of double click on it a little bit, when we talk about these groups, like, hey, I'm a retailer, I sell to retail, I want to like be omnichannel and learn, be really great at e-commerce. And the others that go the other direction, they each are sitting on something very unique and special and almost envious of the other side.
Yep.
Right? Like
grass is always greener. The tide goes in and out.
That's been selling direct to consumer, you know that well, and you're like, I don't know what the hell's going on with retail and malls and this and leases and whatever. And you're the other side, and you're like, well, I have no idea what makes people convert and measure this. It really is that there really is it's not that one's the future and one's the past. They both are, and obviously there's been a huge change in the percentage that is e-commerce. But you know, if I imagine if I zapped 20 years in the future, a tremendous amount of purchases are happening online, and a tremendous amount of purchases or even purchases are influenced by offline, right? And so, you know, we could go down a whole path of like what retail in the future looks like, but it's really an interesting area.
So with that, look, you know, we're on the Data Unlock podcast here, and obviously the question asked, you know, isn't just, you know, what are some of the key strategic decisions to consider when going D2C, but really ask, you know, how does your data strategy fit into this?
Yeah.
And how should you think about, you know, conversion rates, LTV, ROAS, you know, and just general top line, you know, goals and performance?
Yeah. So this is this question as a whole, you know, it's got many
whole 5 another podcast episodes.
But the biggest thing to think about is, especially with the primary transition evolution we're talking, which is sort of going from brick and mortar to direct to consumer, is you have to understand data is so big with this. Who your customer is, right? Who is it? Like you may know, you may not know. You may have a very primitive view. You may need to do some research on this. I mean, by the way, we'll see this a lot where we're like, who's your customer? And they pull up some, you know, it kind of looks like a Mad Men era, you know, Susie the homemaker and like Bobby the mechanic, you know, and they have these traits. And like, that's not reality, right? There's such a richer amount of data and that you can know about the many cohorts of your customers and what they like and their relative value, and then how you target them and measure them, et cetera. We spend a lot of time on that, especially when we're helping evolve this. The assumption that like the women make the dishwasher purchase decisions. That turns out like that's not an accurate assumption, right? But like there's a lot of these like very preconceived, like we set and let's assume we know nothing, and let's like rebuild these foundations. Maybe we were right and that's great, but very often you're not right or you're half right. We have to know that. So there's a big data piece around who's your customer. A huge piece that we spend, I mean, an astronomical amount of time on is understanding what is the value of those customers. And in the beginning, it's hard to know. But this ultimately, what you define as the value of a customer is going to determine what you can spend and what your budgets are and how big it's an incredibly important number. I mean, it's incredibly important, I should say, understanding. And it's also, I should point out, not an average and a one size fits all, right? And people kind of know this, like, 20% of their customers drive 80% of their revenue. Like those little isms are really, really important here, because if they say, we were looking at a real customer a couple weeks ago, and they said, well, our average value, lifetime value for customers is $100. And we're like, because they looked at all their, they actually crunched the data and they averaged it all out and said $100. So we're willing to spend no more than $100 to acquire new customers. And and this is, by the way, very common, they were pretty sophisticated. They really had the data. They came and its average is 100. When we peeled it away, and this happens so often, and we looked, I'm sure you've seen this, when you peel it back, we realized there's no customer that's $100. There are customers that are $20, and there are customers that are $400. But when you average them, you get this number 100. 100 actually is meaningless. So if you set, say, hey, Wpromote, go acquire as many customers as you can, but not at more than $100 per customer, it's actually a weird arbitrary number that you're going to acquire too many customers that are only worth $20 and too few customers that are worth 400 because they're more expensive to find, hypothetically, right? This is where your data, really peeling back the data, is so important. I'm going to posit that 95% of fairly sophisticated organizations that are selling, et cetera, probably have one number like I described, right? Because it's easy. And I'm going to guess that 95% of those, that number is a deceptive number because of exactly this example I'm describing.
And look, I think we can also posit that 100% of brands that went direct to consumer during COVID got their segmentation wrong as well.
Oh gosh, yeah, absolutely.
First and foremost, because the house is burning, and they're just if they are focused on it, they're focused on the obvious segment, which is the people who aren't physically able to come in. Which is exactly the N of one for everyone who used to go to the store yesterday, who are not able to go there today. Which is why, even if you did this exercise now 3 years ago, taking a step back and ask, let's actually now thinking about the personas that will make the trip into the store versus those who will not. And furthermore, maybe look over time from a cohort perspective. What are those cohorts that maybe stop coming in the store? Are they aging out, or maybe they're changing their behaviors? Those kinds of analyses are critical.
Oh, totally. And we saw that COVID was sort of for e-commerce, D2C players, was this mythical, magical period, but it actually got really complicated afterwards, right? I mean, you look at examples, they weren't a client of ours, but like an extreme example is Peloton, right? This is going to be the future of their sales, I don't even know, 5x'd overnight, they build new factories, et cetera. And then once the world opens up, they realize people still like this, but not at the ratio they did when no one could go anywhere. And it was unable to, it just felt like a step function. Interestingly, I saw a graph relatively recently, you may have seen this, but there's been a handful of them, but they've actually, now that we're, I call it whatever, 18 months kind of past COVID, if you will, some period like that there was this, if you actually graphs like the growth of percentage of sales that were e-commerce, you'd actually see, and I should actually have the graph, I'll just use my hand, but it's on this upward trajectory, obviously, year after year after year. In 2020 has this huge spike, okay? And then in 2021, there's a bit of a settling. And if you actually eliminate the blip, it's about on the same trajectory. So, 2023 is higher than 2019, but it's approximately where you think it would be had there been no COVID, which
hard to believe.
It is hard to believe. It's intuitive, but it's also hard to believe, right? And what happened, right? When everything was closed, I had to buy online, right? And then, when things settled, it turns out, well, yes, I do. Some people were exposed. My parents were not big e-commerce shoppers. They've been doing it the same way for a long, long time. And suddenly we're like, oh, that's pretty cool the way that works. And then, once they could do anything they wanted, they now buy more e-commerce than they did pre-COVID. But it's about where the sort of the graph would indicate that they probably would have been. It just sort of expedited them getting there and then kind of return them to reality. And you almost have to it's just a very interesting nuance. I can't think of any other time, any other moment, in history that kind of had this weird, crazy blip of forced change of behavior, and then a normalization where people can figure out, how do I want to buy? I don't like going to stores. Some people really like going to stores. And by the way, the same goes for food delivery, right? Some people are like, oh, there's DoorDash, there's Postmates. That's all I want. I'm just going to do that all the time. Other people are like, oh, I actually do kind of like going to restaurants sometimes. And so it's kind of a healthy thing because consumers get to actually say this is the way I want to learn, kick the tires and make decisions. and they can have differing opinions on that.
Yep, no, 100%. I mean, the other question I'd ask though is, look, a few minutes ago I sort of asked the question, how many brands that went direct to consumer during COVID got it right?
Yeah.
And you can sort of ask a different question where, if brands actually had gotten it right, when they went direct to consumer during COVID, would that adoption curve look materially different today, than, what you're just describing? And while there is a reversion to the mean that I think is natural, I would also say, look, it was such a harsh forcing function that just pushed people into a random set of technology, a random set of strategy decisions, a random set of data decisions, and it wasn't done properly. When you came at the other end, I wonder how many folks are asking, is this actually meet my needs today?
Yeah, listen, you're hitting on a really interesting point, and we saw this in our own, client base. Everyone that wanted to sell direct to consumer or through e-commerce benefited, right? Because it was a forcing function. Some of those experiences sucked, right? Like there were, we had clients, I won't name them because it's negative, but they weren't ready for it. Sales skyrocketed, and they just weren't prepared. Their e-commerce experience was kind of bad. They didn't really ship on time. They weren't managing inventory with their ads. So you click a link and then it turns out it's sold out. The customer service was overwhelmed because they hadn't ramped that. And those customers that did not have amazing experiences, well, A, they're not buying from them online again. And B, they may abandon the brand altogether. So there was, and that's sort of the real negative scenario. On the flip side, we had those that were ready for it. I mean, they didn't know COVID was going to happen, of course, but they weren't like, oh, great, people are online. It was like, we think this is the future. We're building the systems, processes, infrastructure. We want this to be an amazing experience. We have content and ads and targeting this. And then, this sort of horrible, amazing thing happened and they were ready. And those, I will say, when we talk about reverting to the mean, those looked more like a step function up than reverting to the mean. And the one that I described previously was probably reverting to below the mean because they got sales and delivered a subpar experience. And that's actually, you talk about brand. I mean, we can all kind of know this, but by far, the worst thing you can do in building a brand is have actual customers have a bad experience. That's horrible. Lifetime value for that goes, or future lifetime value after the first purchase goes to zero. Not to mention anybody else they ever talk to about the brand. So yeah, what you're describing, there's definitely not a one size fits all in everyone kind of went like this. That's the aggregate and the individual, the individual performance and the sort of the net after COVID varied dramatically.
Yep. So let's maybe spend a few seconds talking about the real winners.
Yeah.
And I think, as you alluded, certain brands that really knew how to go direct to consumer, they capitalized. The ones who didn't still capitalized, but then they reverted a bit.
Yeah.
But look, if you really look at what fueled the growth for so many brands, it's Google ads, Facebook ads, it's the internet, it's the rest of the internet, and the big three that really drive consumers to their favorite or soon to be favorite brands to go and buy whatever they need to buy. And maybe you can talk today about if you're going direct to consumer, how do you orient to these machines that Facebook and Google have developed that are just so smart. They seemingly look, they know if I'm looking to buy a mattress, they know if I'm looking to buy an exercise machine, they know if I need a pair of eyeglasses, they're just going to send me there, and they're going to make sure that it's in front of the right customer at the right time. Where does my brand fit in? Where does the rest of my business fit in? And what does that look like?
So I will say the single biggest common thread of the winners, and continues to be, that isn't post-COVID winner. This is those that won and continue to win is they have amazing content. That is I think the single biggest thing. I mean, part of the result of the, we talk a lot about ChatGPT and AI this year, but really the behind the scenes impact over the last couple of years, the last handful of years, has been the fact that they're using these amazing predictive models and machine learning and AI to figure out what ads should go in front of what person at what time. It's pretty incredible. So gone are the levers where you're saying, I want this ad to go to this person at this time of day, et cetera. And you kind of let the platforms, you let Meta and Google and TikTok and others kind of do this. Now, with that being an equal playing field, right? If anyone can sort of say, here's my product, go figure out how to sell it. The real big on either side, the two different, and those are no longer the levers. Who's better at the levers and dials is not a thing anymore. What it means is that the winners are going to be separate from the product itself. If you have a bad product, great product, that's going to be a big determinant. So let's just say equal products. Is one, your understanding of your audience. What are these customers worth, and who are they, and how much am I willing to spend to get them? That understanding that the business metrics on the input and the output is enormous. And the second thing is just content. It's just literally the creative. Facebook Meta might do an amazing job figuring. I just bought a new wallet, like a small wallet. It was funny because I did some research and bought one, and then I'm just like, all I see is wallet ads for like 3 days on Instagram. And it's like, okay, like they correctly identified, like I was in the market for a wallet. They kind of missed it because I already bought it, but whatever. But interestingly, like at the winner at that point isn't the 8 different wallet companies that reached my eyeballs, because they successfully did that, or Meta successfully pointed Instagram to me or pointed me to Instagram. It's who just had the best content, whether that's video, whether that's an influencer, whether that's a carousel ad, whether you're highlighting the features or the price or it's cool or new or whatever, like that is it. Content. And when I say content, I mean the sum of both an ad creative content, whether that's a short form video or something. It could be your actual website, the way that it looks and feels, the way the user and buying experience works, how frictionless, it's integrated so that I don't have to, I can click a button and use Apple Pay versus my credit card or mobile, like all these things. Like to me, that's all kind of the user experience and content. There's separate flavors to this, but to me, that's all one, right? That experience of interacting with the brand is everything. It's the checkout, it's the ad, it's the website, it's the description, it's the testimonials, it's whatever might be applicable to selling whatever you're selling. It's all of that. And so that's who wins, right? Is if you can, know what makes your product click for me. Because by the way, that's also, take it to the next level. There might be 8 different groups of, just to use the example, wallet buyers. They might end up buying the same wallet, but for different reasons, right? One might buy it because it's like, I just want it to be really like small or whatever. And one I want it to be it because it's like this made of this material. And the other, it's like, I just wanted one that was like cost effective, right? It might actually be the same wallet, but if you can figure out who was interested in what features and highlight those, obviously like you're going to win versus me guessing or throwing out all 8 things and only one is really the one that's driving your purchase decision. So I'd say the inputs and understanding the business metrics is super, super, super important. Again, we hit it earlier that I think my average customer is worth this. If you don't really, really, really understand that, you will put in the wrong input. You just won't know how little or how much or how aggressive you're going to leave, either waste money or leave money on the table. It's inevitable. And the other side is like, who has the best user experience in telling their story and the brand. And I will say, and this is one thing that it accelerated in COVID and has continued, that has not reverted to the norm or to the mean. It was an amazing moment because everyone's online and suddenly there's all these brands that it wasn't just who has shelf space in Target, right? It was like, hey, I'm on the internet. And so everyone has unlimited shelf space. There was tens of millions of people that discovered new brands, call it challenger brands, upstart brands, if in whatever product category, that they had never heard of before because they were purchasing, maybe all they did is go to Target and look at the aisles and it wasn't in the aisles. And if they liked the product and got a good user experience, they are now a new customer of that brand, potentially for life. So one of the wonderful, amazing things that came out of this like forced change in behavior is a huge opportunity for the non-800-pound gorillas to sort of get their moment, to be introduced to, and maybe this little tiny player that's competing against the behemoth in a certain space kind of gets an equal, might actually shine better because they were just always better at social media and having a slicker website and tell their product story better than the 800-pound gorilla that just relied on shelf space in big box retailers. It's an amazing moment for a lot of brands.
Yep. No, and it's and I think your recipe is great in that. Look, you're not going to compete. Facebook's algorithms work for everyone. And as a brand, you need to develop great content. And then I think also just getting back explicitly to your segmentation strategy. Who are you targeting with your different types of content, and what's the value of each one of them as you look to optimize your ad bidding strategies. Facebook is not going to figure that out for you. And your ability to really scale those budgets and that effectiveness comes down to putting those two together in a very precise fashion so that Facebook can optimize it.
Yeah.
So Mike, we're getting to the bottom of the hour here. Final question for you: if you were to have this conversation around taking your brick and mortar business direct to consumer with anyone in the world, again, not with me, who would it be and why?
So this is such a hard one, right? Because this may be somewhat of a counterintuitive choice given the context of this, but I feel like I know my direct to consumer world and my e-commerce world like really, really well. I think if I could sit down with somebody and pick their brain on the future, I'd pick Doug McMillon, who's CEO of Walmart, mostly because it's the world's biggest seller of stuff. And they have a huge online business, but like really it's that insight into like, where's the world going from a retail experience to then figure out like, where are we ahead or behind in our helping these transformations happening that in the beginning. I think that would be it. I debated. This is a tough one because I probably going to email you like tomorrow and be like, okay, never mind. I got 3 others, but we'll stick with this one for now.
Great. Well, that's that definitely makes a ton of sense for me. And Mike, thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your wisdom with us. When I really just reflect on the conversation. It's a massive transformation, and it's not just one of putting the nuts and bolts in place, to make sure that your customers have better shipping logistics and better, digital experiences. But it's really asking, who are my customers? What's the data behind them? What's the segments? And and really just understanding the shape of your business at the topmost strategic level. It's yes, there's a tremendous amount of operational pain. There's a tremendous amount of technology. There's a tremendous amount of personnel additions that you'd have to you need to put in place to do it well. But ultimately, if you don't understand who your customers are, what their intentions are, what their behaviors are, you're just not going to be pointing this transformation in the correct decision.
You nailed it. I think that's absolutely right. We have sort of one of our sort of internal sayings here is like, go slow then fast. And what I mean by that is
Measure twice, not once.
Spend the time to understand. I think that was a Navy SEAL thing from way back in the day, which I like. But spend the time to say, let's understand our customer. Let's look at our data. Let's understand why people like our product or products or why they don't. Right. Let's really get these things right. And then with that knowledge and that confidence, then let's go fast. And then let's build this business.
Oh, that's great. And so, Mike, for anyone who wants to get in contact with you or learn more about Wpromote, where should they go?
Yeah, so we actually we put out a bunch of thought leadership that I love, white papers and studies and surveys and stuff. It's on wpromote.com, and you can hit resources. And then, but yeah, you listen. This is you can hear from my excitement about this. We live and breathe this and love it. And obviously, if there's organizations out there that are looking to take the plunge, whichever direction that plunge is, that's what we do and love to do at Wpromote. So we'd love to hear from you. You can always shoot me an email at mike@wpromote.com. And thanks for having me. This is great. I love the topic and great conversation.
Awesome, Mike. And thank you to everyone listening to this episode of the Data Unlocked podcast. If you'd like to learn more about Simon Data, please visit us on the web at simondata.com or email us at hello@simondata.com.